Good evening, everyone. It is so good to see you together here at the library in James City County. I am Martha Walker. I am a community viability specialist, and you say, what is that? But I work for Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia Tech. We represent the two land-grant universities, as you know, Virginia State University and Virginia Tech. I serve the Commonwealth of Virginia. I travel around this state and I work with organizations, community groups, governing bodies, state agencies on various topics, and I work with every extension agent in the state. So it's my pleasure to be here with you tonight, and I want to thank those who have put this meeting together, and you'll be meeting them a little bit later. You know, as you've been coming in the door, I've been fortunate enough to spend a little time greeting you, and I've heard some interesting comments. We already know what rule is. I don't know why we're here. We've already done this. Okay. One of the things that we know for certain is that rule is different in every county in Virginia. Every county. I want you to know I live in Pennsylvania County. Do you know where that is? It is, thank you. It is a wonderful county. It's the largest land size county in Virginia. Has a population a little over 60,000 people. And I'm there because my husband would not live anywhere else. And I have a bumper sticker that says, I wasn't born in Pennsylvania County, but I got here as quickly as I could. If you come to Pennsylvania County, I want to show you around. Rural is different there. It means different things. Sometimes we know when we've already had a conversation, sometimes we need to have it again at different points because it brings up new information. Some of you already have a vast understanding about what's going on, not only in this county, but also in the state. Others of you need to expand that knowledge a little bit. And that's our goal tonight. Our goal tonight is to bring you information about what is going on in James City County and what's happening in the state. Sometimes we don't know what we do not know. And we need to bring people together, gather the right kinds of facts, and then have another conversation. That second conversation, we want to invite you to it in July, and there'll be more information about that as soon as we can confirm the location, right? So we have that scheduled, and I promise you that will be an opportunity where every voice will be heard. We will gather your thoughts, we will pull them together, and I am charged with gathering that information, compiling it, and then presenting it to your Board of Supervisors on what you think, what your needs are and what your wants are. And I assure you I'm a very candid and very upfront person when I hear things, so I'm capturing notes as we go. Tonight, you should have a couple pieces of information in your hand. Let's make sure you've got it. You should have a packet that's stapled with a program on the front, do you? Now, in that packet, let me just walk you through that very quickly. The second sheet has a speakers list on it so that you have the names and contact information of every speaker that's going to be talking to you this evening. The other piece that you have on there, you have a summary of resources. Sometimes you go, I want to know more about that, or I didn't quite understand what was being said. Well, what we've tried to do is to give you the list of resources that we have found to be helpful on some of these topics. There are hundreds of thousands of resources available to you. So these are just a quick summary. Finally, what we've given you, I've put together for you, is a note page. I don't know about you, but I can hear something, and when I get home, I have missed it. I have lost that thought. So this note page here is hopefully for you to capture some thoughts as we go through the evening, and then to bring those with you when you come back for the discussions, the further conversations in July. Finally, you will see the last couple of things are some articles that some of our speakers will refer to. So I hope you will have this information available to you. There's one more key piece. How many of you have the Virginia Agricultural Magazine? Would you make sure you've got that? If not, would you be sitting next to somebody you can share with? Well, I want to thank Leanne DuBois for bringing those from the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services with us tonight. One of our speakers, Dr. Bobby Grisso, will be using that during his presentation. So I hope you have that magazine with you. And there's one more thing that you should have. I know some of you get, oh, Martha, please don't make me do an evaluation. Would you please? Virginia Cooperative Extension wants to know what you think about programming that is offered in your community. And if you've been to one of Doris's programs or any other extension agent's program, you know that we're going to ask you for your thoughts. So hopefully you have an evaluation form, and hopefully you will use a pen or some kind of writing instrument to fill it out and then leave it at the registration desk. So let me just summarize very quickly. Tonight we are here to gather new information or to expand what we currently know. The second thing we are here for is to gather new resources and to create even more conversation and prepare us for a further conversation in July. You are going to hear some speakers. Most of them are in this room. 2 of them are on the campus at Virginia Tech and will be speaking to you via high tech, Skype. So we're very excited to have that happen as well. We also want to start tonight by having greetings from the chairman of our Board of Supervisors, Mr. John McLennan.
Good evening, and I want to start by thanking you for coming out this evening. I mean, I think this is a great representation of folks who are interested in this kind of an issue, and it's really exciting to see all of you out here tonight to help the County Board of Supervisors better understand what our citizens think about rural lands and how we can better implement policies that respect the wishes of property owners, the broader community, taxpayers, and all those who are affected by the utilization of land in our community. I'm very pleased that Supervisor Andy Bradshaw is here with us this evening. I don't think any of the other members of the board are here tonight. I don't see any, but our County Administrator, Bob Middaugh, is here as well. I want to draw attention to them. And I want to express my special thanks to all of those who've come in to help illuminate the topic this evening. We have some great speakers, and Martha, appreciate your organizational skills and talents that are brought to bear here tonight, and our own staff who've been working so hard on this particular matter. Leanne DuBois, who's been working with the Economic Development Authority, in particular focusing on rural land and economic development, and we've got some very exciting things going on. I'm here to listen, to hear what the speakers have to say, and I will continue to be involved in this process to listen to what you have to say so that we can, again, be better educated and informed when we try to make decisions about what is best for James City County, and to understand fully the perspective that all of the folks in this room and beyond have about rural lands. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I have had the opportunity over the last several months to work with 2 individuals that I have come to truly respect. They are very insightful, they have given us great information and summary, and they have tried extremely hard to represent every citizen in James City County. Leanne Reitenbach and Ellen Cook, come and talk to us a little bit about what's currently going on.
Thanks, and again, I'm really excited that so many people have come out. This is a great showing. So, my name is Leanne Reidenbach. I'm a planner for the James City County Planning Office, and let's see. I'm going to give a little bit of background and statistics about James City County and rural lands in James City County. And as Martha mentioned at the very beginning, there are a lot of different ideas about what rural is exactly. It's different things to different people in different communities. So I'm going to take a second just to say when I say rural lands, what I'm referring to for James City County. Basically, we have a designation on our comprehensive plan land use map that is called rural lands. It's the area that's, it's in green on our typical map, which is in the back. It's kind of an iridescent color on this map towards the western part of the county. But that's what we consider to be our rural lands. And we define that as areas that contain farms, forests, and scattered homes where there's a lower level of public service delivery or where utilities and urban service areas don't exist and aren't planned for the future. So that's usually what we think of as rural lands. There's about 44,000 acres of land that is outside of our typical service areas, and about 32,000 acres of that are designated rural lands. So I'm also going to give just a couple of background statistics and facts about our rural lands. The first slide that I have up here shows some trends in residential subdivision development in the rural lands. I recognize this only takes us up to 2006. We're working on some updated data. So you can see the trends in rural land subdivisions by year and the number of lots that have been created each year. And then in 2007 and 2008, there were about an additional 70 lots that were created in our rural lands. And as I said, we're currently compiling some more information, and when that's available, we'll post it to our website so that everybody can take a look at that. I also have a couple of statistics about agricultural use in our county, and all of these agricultural statistics come from the 2007 USDA Ag Census, and that's the most recent data that we have. There was a 2012 census as well. Those results will be released in February of this coming year, so we'll be able to update our statistics. And also these statistics cover all of James City County. They're not just concentrated on what we consider to be our rural lands. So the national trend in farming is a decline in the number of acres and farms. And that's also reflected in James City County, which is our top graph, that there's been a decline in the number of acres that have been in farms. In 2007, we had about 5,831 acres, or 6% of James City County was considered to be in farming. Now, also keep in mind that doesn't count active timbering. This is solely farming, solely focused on agriculture. So we do have a large timbering community in James City County, and we recognize that as well, but it's not included in that acreage. Between 2002 and 2007, we did see a 35% decline in the amount of land in farming. But also, as you'll see, between 2002 and 2007, we saw an uptick in the number of farms, which means that farms in James City County are generally smaller than the average. They average about 10 acres to 49 acres, as opposed to the larger farms. And this is just a quick rundown, and I don't think all of my colors are showing quite right on here, but showing changes from 1997 to 2002 to 2007 in agriculture. So you can see that we've had a reduction again in the land in farms, the size of farms, but at the same time have seen an increase in the market value of production of those farms. So farming, it's still a viable and important part of the James City County economy, and that's really what I wanted to share with this slide. So next I'm just going to give a quick background of some of the previous discussions we've had on rural lands. I'm sure that everybody in this room is familiar that this conversations about rural lands policies and programs, it's not a new topic for our area. We've had conversations as part of comprehensive planning efforts as far back as the 1980s and 1990s, and probably even before then. Some of you may stretch back that far and be able to relate to those other conversations. We've had support in our comprehensive plan for rural economic development, for farming and for timbering, and for controlling residential growth in our rural areas outside our service areas. In 2005 to 2007, the county conducted a rural land study which looked solely at residential development in rural lands. As part of that, there was 4 flexible options for residential development that were evaluated and suggested and proposed, but those were not ultimately adopted. In 2011, we took another look at some potential tools that might help with rural lands issues. We looked at a transfer of development rights feasibility study, and for those who aren't familiar with what transfer of development rights, or TDR, is, it was looking at allowing people in designated areas outside of our service boundaries to sell the development rights for their property to a developer located in an urban service area, in an area where we'd like to encourage residential growth, and therefore protecting some areas in the designated rural areas, and then having maybe increased density or other incentives inside the more denser populated areas. That was reviewed by the Board of Supervisors, and given a number of factors in the county at the time, was not determined to be a feasible strategy for the county right now. But we are tracking the legislation that goes along with TDR and tracking conditions, and if at some point that does become a viable option, we'll take another look at that. Finally, and this is probably the most exciting news on the slide, in 2013, the county received an agricultural and forestry industries grant from the state. And the purpose of that grant is to help us put together a strategic plan for rural economic development. And you met a couple of the members of the committee that are helping us out with that. They were at the sign-in table, and they're kind of interspersed throughout the audience. But they're members of our Rural Economic Development Committee, and we'll be kicking that process off this summer. And there'll be more chances to learn about rural economic development and also to have input in that process as well as we get rolling. So stay tuned for more information about that, but that's something we're very excited about getting started on. Just a little more information about the comprehensive plan. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of what we use to define what I consider to be rural lands as I'm talking about that with you today. The comprehensive plan looks at our 20-year planning horizon for James City County. Most of the areas that are rural lands are outside of our primary service area, or PSA. The PSA is the growth boundary, an area where we expect services to occur: water and sewer, utilities, transportation, closer access to schools and other public services. That's all inside the primary service area, and outside the primary service area is the rural areas. The land use section contains some specific development standards that the county uses when evaluating new uses in the rural areas. And it focuses on what's suggested primary uses and secondary uses, and what sorts of intensities and impacts and designs are appropriate for rural areas, just given the nature of the roads there, the fact that most properties are on well and septic are served by those, and so you have to be able to balance the capacity with the suggested uses. There are also a series of goals, strategies, and actions which give us direction for how to implement the vision of the comprehensive plan. And these were put together as a combination of research and public input, and were ultimately endorsed by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, most recently in 2009. And specifically, there's a strategy in the land use section that calls for reevaluating the kinds of uses allowed by the ordinance, supporting rural economic development and the viability of farming and forestry, and also looking at patterns and requirements for residential development. And there's a copy of the land use map, and there's also a couple copies of the comprehensive plan on the back table back there. We've got some other resources from our speakers too. If you're interested in taking a look at that later this evening, you're welcome to. We also have the zoning map, and the colors got a little blurred on this one too, but we've got an actual printed version of the zoning map in the back as well. And the zoning ordinance uses the guidance from our comprehensive plan and puts that guidance into actionable standards that can be applied to specific parcels based on their zoning district. And usually it defines uses, things like setbacks, height limits on buildings, things of that nature. So we usually look at our general agricultural, or A1 districts, and our R8, or rural residential districts, as being our more rural agricultural districts. And those it's supposed to be a darker green and a lighter green on the map. And again, you'll probably get a better perspective if you take a look at the map in the back. So from a residential perspective, from the zoning ordinance, both of these zoning districts have a 3-acre minimum lot size for any new lot that's created. But we also have some relaxed standards that allow for family subdivisions if you want to take a piece of land to give to a child or a parent. Also, it's typically single-family, standalone houses, or some duplexes. And most of the houses that are outside of our service area are served by well and septic. Some of our R8 land is actually located in our service areas, and so they do get public water and sewer, but typically it's all on well and septic. And then larger subdivisions that are 6 lots or more, they all share a community well, as opposed to having a well on each of their own parcels. And they also generally have their own access road to serve as access to the lots. So there's a little bit of a difference if you're only subdividing a couple of parcels versus if you want to go beyond 6 parcels. The zoning ordinance also specifies some economic uses. We allow a variety of working lands related uses such as keeping animals, veterinary clinics, crop production, small scale farming, timbering, those sorts of uses. And also some support uses are incorporated like food processing, farm machinery, sales and repair, farmers markets, nurseries, retreat facilities, wineries, et cetera, et cetera. And I brought a copy of our zoning ordinance along as well if you're interested in looking at the ordinance further. And we also have that posted on the county's website. We'll have a resource document that lays all of this out, posted up there, and gives you the links so that you can go explore these comprehensive plan strategies and the ordinances on your own time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen, who's going to talk a little bit about tools for protecting the rural economy.
Thank you. Good evening. As Leanne just mentioned, there are several other tools that the Board of Supervisors has put in place over the years to help the county work with landowners to protect the rural economy and preserve rural character. These programs are the Agricultural and Forestal Districts, the Purchase of Development Rights Program, and the Green Space Program. And I'm just going to give you a brief description of each one of those. So starting with the first one there, the Agricultural and Forestal Districts, this is a voluntary program that is a formal method of assembling properties into large contiguous districts that are meant to promote continued use of the properties as working lands and restrict their development during the 4 to 10 year duration of the district. This program works with the Commissioner of Revenue's Land Use Value Taxation Program and allows landowners to apply for a reduced tax assessment based on the value of the lands as working lands rather than what the value of the lands would be as a developed parcel. The second one there is the Purchase of Development Rights Program. This is also a voluntary program that pays landowners to protect the cultural and natural resource assets on their property with a primary focus on working lands outside of the primary service area. This program allows landowners to enter into agreements to sell the development potential of qualifying property while maintaining the right to continue to own and use the property. And finally, we have the Green Space Program, again, a voluntary program that has worked in partnership with local stakeholders to preserve land significant to the environmental, historic, and community character of this area. This program's focus is on areas inside the primary service area, but there is flexibility to use it outside the PSA as well. Similar to the PDR program, the Green Space Program can allow landowners to either enter into agreements to sell the development potential of a qualifying property while maintaining the right to continue to own and use it, but it also has the flexibility to allow an owner to sell the property outright in a fee simple purchase. So those are some additional tools that the county currently has in place. And I'll hand you back over to Martha.
Thank you, Ellen. We're going to be linked to 2 of my colleagues at Virginia Tech, Dr. Bobby Grisso and Dr. Jennifer Gagnon. Dr. Grisso is actually the Associate Director for the Virginia Cooperative Extension and as well as a professor at Virginia Tech. It is always a pleasure to work with Bobby, and we're very grateful. He is going to give you an overview of what's happening in Virginia related to when land needs to be productive. What are farmers doing to keep that land in production? When he finishes, Jennifer is going to have a conversation about forestry. And we're very fortunate to have Shannon McCabe. Shannon, where are you? Thank you, Shannon. Shannon is with, would you stand up one more time, please? Shannon is with the Virginia Forestry Association and has some handouts, and she is going to be here in the room until the end of the program. So if you have any questions about forestry, you can, you'll talk to Shannon. All right. So, Bobby, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can y'all hear Bob, Dr. Grisso? Wonderful. I should have said Dr. Grisso. So sorry. Dr. Grisso. That will be reflected in my evaluation, I'm certain.
Oh, get out of here.
We are going to put you in the space with your presentation online. We're so glad you could join us from Virginia Cooperative Extension there on the campus of Virginia Tech. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and when you're done, if you'll just introduce Jennifer, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Martha. It's great to be here today, and I really want to thank Leanne for helping set up the technology for us to be able to make the presentation. We did see a message that said that we may have a slow link every once in a while, and we may have some problems with our video. And we can get the message across to you. First off, I want to welcome and that Virginia Extension is committed to the Virginia lands, people and their communities. And so I work as a associate director within Cooperative Extension, primarily for ag natural resources. Let's go to the next slide, Martha. Our partnerships across the state include both state partners, which we're talking about Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. And both of our particular organizations have some very unique programs, and I just want to make sure that they're highlighted here. And we also have the ag experiment stations, 13 of those across the state, that really focuses on local types of research that may be needed in their community. Then our local partner is very important to us as far as the funding and the organization of our partners, and we have we have a person in Cooperative Extension, what we refer to as county agents in every single county and a lot of the jurisdictions as far as cities. Next slide, Martha. Our partnerships also include the agents, and let me just point out Doris Heath and Jeremy Johnson. If you're in the audience, please wave your hand. Doris sure to do that because I can't tell. Yes. Okay, good. And they're very important as far as the local base and being able to provide these types of opportunities that we're doing today. Next slide. This is just a overview of all the different offices I've already mentioned. And actually, if you take a look at all the agents across the state, we have 250. That means that we're way up from where we were 2 years ago. Most of those agents are new. 70 of those agents are brand new, and so they're learning. They're being engaged in new parts of all kinds of programming. Now let's go to the next slide. This is a program area. Martha and I, we like to talk about A&R as being more than growing crops, and really when we look at Virginia Cooperative Extension, we're growing our families, and we're also developing great community activities and efforts so that we can strengthen our communities. These are our 4 areas, and of course, Martha mentioned a little bit earlier that she works in community viability. Next slide is just a demographic of the state of Virginia as far as the population, and I like to kind of highlight that 30% of our population in Virginia lives in. Your percentage is quite lower in the James City area. But at the same time, the reason I point that out is that as you start to look at alternatives and maybe investments that may be needed, make sure you look at the other activities that are going on in a variety of different areas across the state. If you'll go to the next slide, Martha, this is just the items about farmland, the statistics as far as looking at farmlands. There's 47,000 farms across Virginia. Most of those are in the range of about 181 acres, and that farmland is very valuable for us, both for food and fiber, and they produce enough to provide food and fiber for 150 people. Next slide, Martha. These are some of the statistics, and matter of fact, I forgot to mention. And let me thank Leanne from VDAX for bringing the magazine down. And basically, just if an engineer gets too bored, some nice glossy items here you can look over. And so a lot of the different things I'm talking about agriculture are in that particular book as you flip through. Again, some of the statistics there. The thing that I always like to highlight, though, is that the jobs that agriculture provides. There's about 500,000 jobs that different levels of agriculture. It's the largest industry in the state, as I'm sure our VDAX partner will talk about later, $55 billion. And then as Jennifer talks about her side, on the forestry side, it's 24 to 27 billion. So it's very large as far as the impact on financial revenues within the state. The other area that is just exploding, in my opinion, is the export markets. And if you take a look at that, we export about $2.6 billion worth of Virginia-developed produce across the world. And so very interesting, a lot of different things being developed. And since you're close by to the naval yards, the export area, there's probably some unique opportunities to be able to be engaged with that. The next slide, basically, receipts, Martha, we're doing pretty good on slides?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, just checking. And so if you take a look at cash receipts, you'll notice that broilers and turkeys are fairly high on our particular ag commodities. You'll see livestock, and then you'll see a variety of different other things as we go down through as far as looking at cash crops, as far as grains, etc. Those are our top 5, and if you notice on page 9 of your magazine, that has a lot of the different statistics there, including some of the things that we've talked about in products. Next slide. Most of your discussion that's going on may encounter or may talk about why some of this farmland or this rural land is so important for the areas around it. And so a lot of times what I've been talking about is that we have an aging population with farmers. The average age is over 58. That means that there has to be a lot of transition of both revenue and assets over to another generation fairly quickly. I'm looking at beginning and transitioning farmers. And the other side that I like to think about is that we may need to start looking at preserving some land for farming and at least setting that land that we know we'll have in the future to be able to produce the food and fiber that we need on a local basis. And so a lot of the material that can be highlighted from that ensuring the future of farmland is highlighted on page 15 and 16. Again, when I think about this, the uniqueness of our rural communities, especially in Virginia, is that farming community and the family-oriented enterprise that goes on there. I would say that when I take a look at agriculture in Virginia, it has greatly changed over the last, especially the last 50 years, and so we're fairly excited about where things are going and transitions that are being made. The next slide shows some things about local foods. I forgot. The local foods, going local, has become very Virginia. There's a new term out we refer to as civic agriculture. I would encourage you, as you're going through the planning process, to take a look at some of the materials that are out there on civic agriculture. Local foods are important, and let me just explain that fairly quickly. When you go to the grocery store, most products that you see in your grocery store have probably been on the edge as we think about energy conservation, those kind of things. It's very important that we start taking a look at how we utilize those particular resources in order to provide food.
Dr. Grisso, would you go back over that particular slide on local foods? We were getting some
Inappropriate feedback.
Inappropriate? Okay.
It means we couldn't hear you.
Okay, I'd like to do that. This is probably my strongest discussion item for you to be thinking about on planning, is to think about the civic agriculture. There's a new term. It involves a variety of different processes that you go through in order to highlight a variety of different things. There's a whole 2 or 3 pages talking about local foods in the magazine. I'd like for you to take a look at that. Why is local food so important? And the emphasis thing I was trying to bring across is that most of your items in a grocery store is transported about 1,000 miles on the average. Well, that means that our resources that we have are going a lot into energy just to be able to provide that food. A lot of our cities are getting into what I call food deserts. In other words, it's just not good, nutritious food available for some of our underserved and audiences that we have in our local communities. So when I take a look at this, farmer markets are just across Virginia, and really because VDAX has made this a priority as far as looking at how to take local produced items and be able to market these in an effective way. But just for an example, in the Roanoke area where I'm from, we just had 2 brand new farm markets be established over the last 2 weekends. And so this is an area that a lot of people are seeing investments going into, and the whole reason is to bring nutritious and locally produced food to the market. Within the 4-H area, and actually in the Master Gardener area, we have seen a large increase with community gardens, where basically we're seeing the advantage of the community gardens being both a stabilizer as far as local foods, but also a mental stabilizer. And matter of fact, some of the research is now being done, especially in Japan and areas, that encouraging people to take a little time to spend some time in the green spaces that we're establishing, whether it be forest or whether it be within the community gardens, just for our sanity. So a lot of different things we can think about there. And so I'm always telling my wife that I'm making things more mentally stable, and she argues about that with me, but at the same time, I think it's kind of interesting. Farm to school programs, trying to look at bringing local foods into the farm or within the school systems for the meals and et cetera there. Programs have already been established, and so really what I think we're finding is that having a source of that food is an issue. And if I take a look at it, our partners both at Virginia Tech and Virginia State have worked a lot on bringing fruits, vegetables, meat products, and dairy to the local area, and really trying to focus on not only what we need from a nutritional standpoint, but even ethic types of foods in the local area. The next slide is on the farm family. I'd like to highlight that because I really don't think this is a farming issue. I think this is more of a rural type application. All families engaged in whatever may be going on in rural lands. Most of them will have some off-farm income to be able to afford, but to be able to keep it viable. The women have been becoming larger landowners and et cetera. 14% of our farms are owned and operated by our women and females within the community. And the farm becomes a playground. And so I usually put that in there because I'm thinking about safety items, but at the same time, kids grow up on a farm, they know how much fun that they can have there. The next slide is focused on the community and neighbors. I think there's a uniqueness about the rural community that we often don't take, that we really do take for granted. And so it doesn't take very long before you're going across the state and starting to look at a variety of different communities and seeing how neighbors in the rural communities interact together and bringing out their uniqueness. Are you on the right slide?
Yes, sir.
Martha? Oh, you are. Well, sweet. One more slide. What I really see in your decisions that you're having to make is you've got to look at a variety of different rural applications, if you will. There's a lot of alternatives that you can look at, but what would really help municipalities as far as looking at where does food come from? What can we do as far as increasing the opportunity to bring food into that, and then also the fiber, the communities, the well-being that we've all been talking about. I've enjoyed the time together with you today. Probably won't be able to take any questions, but I hope that you'll take a look at the manual. There's lots of good items about all different types of alternative agriculture that could be available. A lot of that may be needing some help as far as setting up, looking at alternatives and the enterprise to be able to establish those. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. I'm going to slide across out of the picture. And Jennifer, how do you see yourself?
This is great. So good evening, everyone. This is the first time I've given a presentation where I can't see my slides. I can't see my audience, but I can see myself. So this will be an interesting experience for me.
I'm here for you, Jennifer.
I'm sorry, is this Martha?
I'm here. I'll advance your slides for you.
Okay. So I coordinate the Virginia Forest Landowner Education Program at Virginia Tech, and that is a cooperative extension program. And my job is to develop and deliver forestry education programs and materials for the private forest landowners in Virginia. And so I thought what I would do tonight is talk to you about forestry in Virginia, how much forest we have, who owns it, what types of forests we have, and then we'll zoom in a little bit on James City County and take a look at forest land in your county. And then I'll talk about a couple of the threats that our forests are facing, and then I'll finish up with some resources that are available to local leaders, decision makers, planners, and forest landowners in your county. Next slide, Melissa, please. Okay, so this we have about 25 million acres of land in Virginia, and of that, 15.8 million acres, or 62%, is forested. And if you add in the amount of agricultural land we have as well, over 94% of the land base in Virginia is in rural land use. So we are predominantly a rural land use state. And this map you're looking at right now is a land use map. And so the areas that are in pink and red are areas of high population density. The blue areas are water. The yellow areas are agricultural areas. And the green areas are forested areas. So this map just reinforces what I just said about us being really predominantly a rural land use state. You can go to the next slide, please. This is just another way of looking at our forest. This is a forest types map. And so the yellow areas are pine forests, and the green areas are hardwood forests, and then the beige areas are agricultural lands. And what I want you to look at on this map is, if you notice, over here in the west, where we are in Blacksburg, we have predominantly mixed hardwood forests. There's a lot of dark green over in this part of the state. And so these are forests that are made up of oaks, hickories, ashes, maples, yellow poplars. I planted white pine out in this part of the state. We have shortleaf pine, pitch pine, table mountain pine out and mixed in with the hardwoods. We are predominantly hardwood. When you move east and you get over the Blue Ridge, you start to pick up a lot more yellow, pick up a lot more pine forest. We have about 3 million acres of pine forest in Virginia, and about half of that is planted pine. And I would say the majority of that is planted loblolly pine. But we are seeing more plantations of longleaf and shortleaf pine out in the eastern part of the state as well. Okay, next slide, please. So who owns our 15.8 million acres of forest land? This pie chart has divided up forest ownership divided up by ownership type. And so the first one I'll talk about is forest industry. Forest industry used to be a major owner of forest land in Virginia and actually throughout the southeast. And when I say forest industry, I'm talking about companies like Georgia Pacific, Midwest-Vaco, Weyerhaeuser, those kind of companies. Over the past 10 to 15 years or so, they have been selling off the majority of their forest land holdings. And in fact, this 265,000 acres on this slide is probably a huge overestimate of what they own now. They probably own less than 100,000 acres of land. In Virginia, we have about 3 million acres of publicly owned land. So this is land that taxpayer land is managed by a government entity of some sort. So this would include the National Forest, Shenandoah National Park, the 34 state parks the Department of Conservation and Recreation manages, and about 64,000 acres in state forests, which are managed by the Virginia Department of Forestry. The other ownership group is the corporate ownership group, and this ownership group is actually growing quite a bit. The corporate group includes TIMOs and REITs. So TIMOs are timber investment management organizations, REITs are real estate investment trusts. On investment. And they have 2.6 million acres in their ownership, but I would have to say, are we still on? I see an internet connection problem.
Jennifer, we can still hear you. The screen freezes.
Okay, all right, just got that error message. So, okay, I will continue. And so actually, TIMOs and REITs probably own well over 3 million acres of forest land now. But looking at this chart, you can see that the biggest piece of the pie belongs to families and individual landowners. Okay, these are the folks I work with. They own 10.1 million or 60 million acres or 63% of our forest land in Virginia. So what these folks do on their land, the way they take care of their forests can have really that big impact on the forests in Virginia as a whole, because they own the majority of the forest land. And so we want these folks doing good things on their property and keeping their forests healthy. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the cover type map for James City County. And on this map, the green areas show forested areas. And not surprisingly, the further away from Williamsburg you move, the more forest land there is. There's about 125,000 acres total in James City County, and of that, about 64,000 acres are forested, and of that, about 52,000 acres are privately owned. Okay, you can get the next slide. This is just another way of looking at the forest cover. This is by forest conservation value. Basically, on this map, the darker the brown is in an area, the higher the conservation value is of that forest. And conservation value is ranked according to a number of different factors. One of the factors is conversion threat. So how likely is that forest land to be converted to a non-forested use? Okay, so it's very likely that that would be converted to non-forest use. It gets a higher ranking in conservation value. Conservation value is also based on the acreage or miles in streams, shorelines, floodplain forests, and wetlands. If it has Yeah.
Let me interrupt you. We lost you during that conversation, and we know that's very important. So would you go back and explain one more time about the conservation value?
Yeah, do you just want me to go over how it's ranked?
Yes.
Okay. So again, the darker brown areas have higher conservation values, and conservation value is based on how likely that piece of property is to be converted to a non-forested use, how many miles or acres of streams, shorelines, and floodplain forests are in that area. Forests that are in headwaters or on steep slopes have a higher conservation value. Forests that protect drinking water supplies or that are large contiguous blocks of forest land have higher conservation values. Also, sustainable managed working forest lands that are being harvested and planted and actively managed, those have a higher conservation value, as well as areas of forest that have high terrestrial and high aquatic integrity, meaning that there's high species diversity, both in terms of plants and animals. And so, as you can see on this map, as you move west in the county, you pick up a lot of lands that have high conservation value. Some of them surround the reservoir, which I assume is the drinking water supply. And so you do have some very valuable forest land in that area. Okay, next slide, please. So, why are our forests important? They provide a lot of ecosystem services, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term. It's also known as nature's values, nature's services. But basically, ecosystem services are benefits that forests provide to everyone in society, and for which society doesn't necessarily have to pay. So these are things that we get from people's forests. We get them every day, and we don't pay the owner of the forest land for these benefits. Okay, so these include things like air quality improvement. Forests can help improve the quality of air. Water quality protection and improvement. Soil protection. Forests can help keep soil in place, prevent it from eroding, and also as vegetative material degrades, it improves the quality of the soil, the nutrition of the soil. It also includes things like aesthetics. Forests are pretty. They make people happy. People like to drive around and look at them. Many people come to our state every fall to look at our forests. So aesthetics have a value as well. Important for carbon storage. In the photosynthesis process, where trees make food, they take outside, they store that carbon molecule, and they release the oxygen. The forests are really good storage units for storing carbon. Just to give you a little bit of data on that, our forests in Virginia are estimated to take up 23.5 million metric tons of CO2 a year. Now, I have a hard time envisioning what that actually is. So it basically offsets about 20% of the CO2 emissions in Virginia every year. And our standing forests, the 15.8 million acres of forest that we have, they store 1.2 billion metric tons of carbon, which is equivalent to 37 years of emissions in Virginia. So they can have a really big impact. And these are long-term storage systems. Down, if they're made into furniture, if you have a wooden desk in your office, that's made out of carbon. That is storing carbon and will continue to store carbon that was removed from the atmosphere until the desk is burned or until it rots. So it's long-term carbon storage. Also, trees help with climate moderation. We've heard of the urban heat island, how, cities that don't have a lot of forested areas are really hot. If you plant a lot more trees there, that can help moderate the climate, keep it cooler in the summertime, and reduce cooling costs. And of course, forests provide wildlife and plant habitat every day. And so, as you might imagine, these items are really, or these benefits are really hard to put a dollar value on. So, a very conservative estimate of how much these benefits are worth is about $1.7 billion annually, but I've heard estimates up to $30 billion a year. So, very valuable. Okay, go to the next slide. Our forests also have a direct economic contribution to the Commonwealth. As Bobby mentioned, they provide about $27.1 billion annually to our economy. About $350 million is paid each year to forest landowners for selling their timber. Forestry is responsible for about 144,000 jobs in the Commonwealth. And another $2.4 billion comes from our forests in terms of recreation. So people buying hunting and fishing licenses, people buying gear to do hunting and fishing or hiking, those kind of activities. Another $2.5 billion from those. So our forests are very valuable. I can go to the next slide. So that was just the importance of our forests, where they are, who owns them. Our forests do face some significant threats, though. And I just want to talk about two of those threats. The first one I'm going to talk about is exotic invasive species. And so this picture on the slide here is one of my all-time favorites. It requires an explanation, but I just really like it. This is taken on Nature Conservancy property in eastern Montgomery County over here by Blacksburg. And it's a picture of a dead hemlock that was growing out of a dead chestnut stump. The hemlock was killed by hemlock oleodelgid, an exotic invasive insect, and the chestnut was killed by the chestnut blight, another exotic invasive disease. And if you just go up the path just a little bit, there's a bunch of wine raspberry there. It's an exotic invasive plant. And this is a Nature Conservancy property. They have good resources. The sheep are a really tough battle. You can go to the next slide. So why are exotic invasives so bad? They're basically insects, plants, animals, diseases, fungi that are brought here from somewhere else, and they do really well here. And the problem with them is that they alter how our ecosystems function. They change how our forests work. And so this little picture on this slide here, I don't know if you can recognize it from the photo, but this is kudzu. And kudzu is an exotic invasive vine that we have a big problem with in southwest Virginia. And basically what it's doing is it's replacing native species. In this picture, the only species that's really there is kudzu, so we don't have native vegetation growing there. Changing forest structure. Kudzu is covering the shrubs and the trees, and it will eventually kill those plants and bring them down. And so instead of having a vertical structure in our forest, we're just in a big flat mat of vegetation. Decreases forest productivity. Obviously, if you're trying to grow timber or grow an ag crop in this area, you're not going to do very well. It's not going to be very productive. And it decreases biodiversity. In this picture, we have a monoculture. We have one species out there. And as far as I know, kudzu only provides good wildlife habitat for rats. And I have not met too many landowners who are managing for rats. So, and what makes them so successful about being invaders is that they tend to be prolific feeders. The tree of heaven, or lantus, a single female tree can produce 300,000 seeds in one growing season. That's a big problem over in this part of the state. Exotic invasive species tend to be really good disseminators. They're really good at getting their seed out, and so a lot of times their seeds have wings on them that allow them to be wind dispersed. Sometimes the seeds are tucked into tasty fruits, and so birds and other animals will eat them and disperse them, so they're able to get their seed out. They tend to be pretty adaptable. They can grow under a lot of different systems, a lot of different soil types, a lot of different weather conditions, and they tend to grow pretty fast. It's been said that if you lay on the ground and watch kudzu, you can actually see it grow. It's supposed to grow half an inch an hour. So if you have nothing else to do, you can see if that's true. And there tends to be a lack of natural control. So in their native environment, there's something in the system that keeps these things in check, keeps them from going out of control. But whatever that is has not been brought along with it when it comes here. And so they don't have that natural control, and so they get out of control. You can go to the next slide, but you can actually skip that one. Go ahead to the slide that says parcelization and fragmentation. That was one threat, exotic invasives. The other threat is parcelization and fragmentation, which I think is something that folks in James City County are probably grappling with right now. Parcelization is basically dividing large pieces of land into smaller ownerships. So we see that happen all the time, especially, as Bobby mentioned, there's this big transfer of land going on. And a lot of times when the land is transferred to heirs, it gets subdivided among the heirs, and so then you have a bunch of different owners with smaller parcels. That in and of itself is not a big deal, but what usually happens once land is parcelized is that we start to see fragmentation. So those parcels, some of them are converted to other uses. They might all be forest to begin with, but then maybe one of the heirs converts it to a subdivision, and another heir builds a bunch of houses or a shopping mall or something in there. So we start to see this patchwork of different land uses in an area that used to be all forest. And so this can cause some significant problems in terms of forest management. I know most natural resource professionals like to work with people who own big, contiguous parcels of forest. It's easy to do management, it's easy to sing and to prescribe fire, and those different forest management tools that we have. But 50% of the owners in Virginia own between 1 and 9 acres. And 90% of our forest landowners own less than 50 acres. And so we have a lot of these small forest parcels in Virginia. And there's a direct correlation between parcel size and willingness to participate in traditional forest management activities. Basically, the smaller the parcel size is, the less interested the owner tends to be in doing things like harvesting timber or planting trees. And to be quite honest, as natural resource professionals, we struggle with how to help people who do own small parcels and who do want to do these forest management practices. We have trouble actually helping them in some cases because we're just not used to that. We're used to dealing with large acreages. Also, in parcelized and fragmented lands, we see a lot of introduction of exotic invasive species. We see a lot of wildlife and human interactions, most of which are negative. Things like deer eating people's gardens, bears crawling onto people's back porches. We see a lot more of those kind of conflicts in these areas. So it's definitely an issue. It's something that's happening and something that we as natural resource professionals need to learn to work with. Okay, the next slide. Now I just want to go over some of the sources of assistance that are. Next slide. Of course, the first resource I'm going to mention is Virginia Cooperative Extension. My landowner education program, I work with landowners all over the state, and if you own forest land, if you know someone who owns forest land, I strongly encourage you to have them get in touch with me, and we can talk about forest management issues. We have classes and field trips and workshops all over the state. We also have the Virginia Natural Naturalist program that trains citizen volunteers to help with natural resource management and education issues. We have the Sharp Logger program, which is the logger training program that teaches loggers how to sustainable manner. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Another resource is the Virginia Department of Forestry. Each county in Virginia has, this is our state forestry agency, and each county in Virginia has a forester assigned to it. The senior area forester over in James City County is Bryant Bays, and so if you have any forest management questions, you could also contact Bryant, and he or one of his foresters can come out. They work with landowners one-on-one. They can come to a piece of property, walk the property, look for any issues with health or exotic invasive species. They can write a management plan for a landowner. A lot of their services are free. The management plan isn't, but they can really work with landowners one-on-one to help them improve the quality and health of their forest. Okay, next slide. The Virginia Forestry Association, that is a private state forestry organization. Its members include natural resource professionals, both foresters and loggers, as well as forest landowners. Two of the main things that the VSA does is they provide education. So they have a quarterly magazine, the Virginia Forest Magazine, which Shannon McCabe is there. She's an employee of VSA, and she may have brought some of those magazines to share with you. And so those magazines have a lot of good information on forest management. They also work with other forestry organizations to put on an annual forestry summit, and that provides education to natural resource professionals and landowners as well. And the other big thing that they do is that they have a lobbyist who works in Richmond who keeps track of forestry bills or bills that could affect forestry and lobbies to get favorable outcomes on those bills. So please talk to Shannon if you have any questions about forestry and if you want any of the resources that she's brought. I think she's brought a couple of my publications as well with her. Okay, you can get the next slide. The Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries is another organization that has an outreach and education mission, and they do work with landowners one-on-one. So we do find that a lot of forest landowners are more interested in wildlife management than anything else, and so they can work with a biologist from the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries to get a management plan and to assess the quality of their wildlife habitat. So that's just one of the functions of Game and Inland Fisheries, but some of it can directly impact landowners. And they also deal with threatened and endangered species, which can be an issue. Okay, get the next slide. The Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation and manage our state parks. And also they have an outreach and education mission where they do programs at their state parks to educate the citizens of Virginia. They also manage the Natural Heritage Program, which is responsible for cataloging and evaluating the status of all the plants and animals in Virginia. And so they are the ones that identify threatened and endangered species, and they catalog all of that, and they can work on recovery plans for some of those things. So it's another really good resource for landowners. And the last slide, I believe, is the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. This is a quasi-state agency. They are a state land trust. And so when people are interested in putting a conservation easement on their property, basically giving up their development rights to their property, I suggest they contact either the Virginia Outdoors Foundation or the Virginia Department of Forestry. They both can do conservation easements. But basically, this organization helps people conserve their land into perpetuity. And the last slide is just my contact information. So really, if anybody has any forest management questions, please feel free.
I hope you're getting a picture for what's going on in Virginia, that it's about production agriculture. It's about creating revenue streams on farms, whether it's food, whether it's fiber, and I guess we should say that wine is also food, because there's a huge wine industry in Virginia, and then agritourism. So we've tried to, and plus 100 other ideas that are going on.